Ekwa, thank you so much for giving me this interview. I really love the movie. It's one of my favorites this year.
Okay.
And I'd like to start with you just asking you, why is it that you decided to structure the film the way it is with the three chapters and each point of view of each character?
Part of it is a little bit of indecision as to who my lead character should be. When I started working on the script, I had Walter most clear in my mind because I had done a short prequel film called Farewell Meu Amor before the feature. And the short prequel was about Walter's moment right before he goes to the airport to meet his family. So that was the most accessible, but it also felt a little bit cliche to do a film about a guy who had an affair with a woman. So I was also thinking, okay, maybe I'll do it from the daughter's perspective, but I didn't want it to turn into sort of like a Hollywood dance movie. So I couldn't quite decide, and I decided, let me just do from both of their perspectives and see what happens. And I wrote it just from the two perspectives initially. About maybe 6 to 8 months in, it became pretty clear that without the mother's story, like none of the other stories really work or make sense. And so I had to include her story. So I started again from scratch and then had it be a triptych.
There's one scene in the film that I thought was really moving, which is the one where Walter tells his daughter that is, I mean, I'm gonna paraphrase, but it's something like, it's very hard being a foreigner in this country, especially if you're Black, because you have to portray yourself a certain way. And when I dance is the only moment where I can be myself and show myself. And I was just wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about that scene, both in the moment you were writing it and when you were filming it, just what was going through your mind, because it's such a special moment.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, dance is something that's very personal to me. I love dance. I've always been a dancer, and I was born in the U.S. I moved away when I was 5, moved back to Africa, where my family's from, East Africa in particular, and I came back at about the same age as Sylvia's character when I was 17. And you know, my life is very different. English is a first language for me, so I didn't have some of the issues that she might have had, but in terms of just like the culture shock and all of those kinds of things, I did kind of struggle with identity and sort of, you know, what people thought of me versus what I knew of myself and what I wanted to show of myself. And dance was one of the things that was a comfort to me, that was sort of like an identity for me in some ways. And people would react certain ways when I danced. And I remember a mentor telling me, you know, like that is your power. That is, you know, when you dance, it is your power, because that's when you can truly be yourself. So that always stayed with me as a young person. And, you know, I thought about, you know, sort of this father imparting that to his daughter as advice about sort of something that can help her to walk in this world, and in this new country, in this new situation, something that she can take with her. And so when we were filming it, you know, it was also really wonderful. My actors, you know, when we were preparing for the shoot, we didn't do any work on the script itself. We did a number of like improv exercises to sort of revisit what had happened before they came to the US. But I wanted the script to be as raw and as new as possible, because that's what they'd be experiencing. It'd be awkward and weird. So that really actually was the first moment that her and her father were kind of together. And it was really wonderful to sort of see, like, that's the moment where her father is kind of, he sees her in a very specific way, and he's giving her permission to be herself and to be who she sees, which hasn't always been the right person or the right thing for her mom. You know, she needs to be more religious, she needs to be more pious, she needs to be this, she needs to be that. And I think as women, we always get those messages from our societies and certainly from our parents about how we need to be and dress and behave and this, that, and the other. And so this is a moment where her father was kind of giving her a wink and being like, you know, you're fine as you are. and you should, you know, be empowered in that way.
This country is very hard. So when we get to dance, that's the one place where I can actually be myself. So be yourself.
Your film talks a lot about a lot of important things: immigration, racism, even war, religion. But it does that through the story of a family of just ordinary people. And I thought this was actually quite refreshing, because I don't know if you're going to agree with me, but though I think that it's so important, the discussions we're having about having all these issues be in film, sometimes I think it translates into films that are too much about theme, and I don't really relate to those stories so much. Well, I thought your film was an example of how sometimes just the image of these two African adults going to dinner or falling in love was actually made me think more about all these issues than something that was, you know, explicit. Was that in your mind at all, or was it just a coincidence that that's how you started writing it? You know,
Yeah,
how is that?
Thank you for that. I'm so glad that that was how you felt about it. I mean, you know, growing up in Africa on the continent and seeing, you know, in a part of the continent where I never got to see films about us, about my culture, about my people, about our stories, you know, and across the continent in general, and really across the diaspora, we've always had other people telling us who we are, either portrayals in the news, which tend to be bad news for the most part, or other people making stories about us and telling us what's important about us and what's valuable, and you know, those kinds of things. And so and it tends to be two different buckets, all right? And like for the most part, it's either the most exceptional human being that ever lived, or the most devastating and tragic human being, you know, the war story, or the child soldier, or Boko Haram, or, you know, whatever, the issue driven film. So there's a lot of African films that are made about issues and why we should care, and all these poor people, they're suffering, and if it wasn't for the war, the this or the that, you know. And I mean, sure, we, you know, have a lot of those experiences on the continent, like a lot of other places too. But even within those things, even within war and strife and struggle, we still have a sense of humor. We still love each other. We still have families and people that we care about. And so for me personally, in all of my work, and certainly in this film, I wanted to focus less on the issue, less on the politics, and more about how the politics affects the people. Because we never really get to talk about that. We tend to talk about people as sound bites, as the immigrants, the, you know, the child soldiers, the child brides, the whatever. But, you know, those are people. Those are people with lives that were interrupted, or, you know, whatever happened to them. And so that's something that's very important to me, as an African and as somebody who's seen a lot of misrepresentation of my people, and that includes people in the diaspora as well, is just being able to tell a human story. And from that, being able to connect to people from the humanity of them. And they're humans who happen to be in certain circumstances. They're, you know, they are not their problems. They're just human beings who happen to be challenged with certain things. That's what I believe.
Going back to the to dance and music in your film, because they are such narrative elements, they have so much meaning in them. As I was hoping you would talk a little bit about the decisions you made regarding that from the soundtrack, which is so wonderful, and I think for Brazilians it's quite cool because we can understand some of the words. Also, the dancing, was it very choreographed or was it improvised? Yeah, just a little bit about the music and dancing there.
Yeah, so glad you asked. Dance is something that I deeply love, and Angolan dance and music in particular, and wanted that to be a very big part of the film and the storytelling because of the kinds of dances that are in question, you know, with Kizomba and Semba, which is the style of dance that Walter's character practices. In order to dance to Kizomba and Semba, there's not the sort of like a 1, 2, 3, 4, what, you know, like a regular foot pattern that somebody follows. It's really about the person reacting to the music and how they interpret the movement to the music. And so the partner really needs to be very connected to, they need to be connected to each other in order to know which way to go. And I thought that was just such an interesting metaphor for relationship. And, you know, these two people who used to be dance partners, who used to be in step, who used to know exactly how they move. And now, because of the separation in the years, they don't. And so they're struggling and they're not able to connect anymore. And therefore they're not able to dance. And the Kuduro style, which is what Sylvia practices, is sort of like tough and energetic and gritty. And it's a platform that a lot of Angolan youth use as a way of expressing themselves, you know, in a country and in a society where there aren't a lot of places for young people to talk about the things that are on their mind. And specifically for my character, who's a young African girl, and therefore the way in which she would react to her parents and the way her life is going would not be, you know, your typical American teenager style. She would be a lot more reserved, and the way that she could express herself, it would be through music and dance. So wanting to have those two styles almost as like a third language for the characters to be able to communicate through. And just my love of Angolan dance and music and being able to share that with the world. I was so lucky. There's a wonderful choreographer, Manuel Kanza, who actually trained as a professional dance choreographer in Brazil. He's from Angola. And I've followed him online for years. And so when we were getting ready to start the movie, I reached out to him because it was very important for me to have authentic dance in the film. And it just so turned out that he was in New York and was going to be here for the whole summer. And so he choreographed all of the dance that we see in the film is all Manuel's choreography. And he did such an incredible job. And he worked really hard with the actors. They had dance training every single day for like 2 to 4 hours, you know, to get them with the steps and to get them comfortable with each other. And it was such a blessing. That's when I knew, like, all right, this is gonna work. It was magic that he was able to contribute as much as he did.
Mm-hmm. And the music, you knew yourself, or you had someone who helped you with selecting the tracks?
You know, because I do a lot of Angolan dance, and of course that comes with the music, it started with all of my favorite artists and, you know, people that I've been following, and I'm just like, oh, I get to reach out to Eddie Tusa and, you know, Bonga Konda and, you know, Kiaku Kiadaf and all these people whose music I've been admiring for so long. Not all of them are signed to, you know, Sony, or, you know, they're not all easy to find. So we actually, you know, just guerrilla style with my producer and one of the interns started stalking people on Instagram and sending them messages and using Google Translate to send them, you know, change the messages into Portuguese so that they know what we were saying. And we just basically pitched the project to them and, you know, told them we're doing this project and we'd really love to include their music, and this is how much money we have. It's not a whole lot. And people were really very gracious with us and excited about the project and came on as collaborators. So I'm so excited to be able to share, you know, some of the music that we have in there.
I was also thinking about the context that the film is being released, because it was a year in which, on one side, we talked a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement and just anti-racism. That's something that we talked about in Brazil as well. But there's also the COVID context, which I think has a lot of impact on immigrants, not just economically, but even if you're a very privileged immigrant, the idea that you can just fly home if something happens, it's not really true anymore. Yeah. And even people who are in the same country, there's so many families that are apart, kind of like in your film, maybe not for 17 years, but in important moments. And I was just wondering, do you think that this context somehow adds these new layers and new meanings to your film now?
Absolutely. And I mean, who would have known, right, that we'd be experiencing all this year? But I feel like one of the many things that this COVID year has forced us to look at is our connections to people, our ability to stay connected. In some ways we're even more connected because now we're all on Zoom, but are we really? Because, you know, at some point Zoom gets really tiring. You know, the few times that I've been around like people, like not even being able to hug them, or, you know, like the human contact is so, I mean, it's important for us as human beings, for our lives, for our health, to have human contact. So to be in a situation where you can't do that is really quite significant. And to not know when we're going to be able to see each other, because it depends on when the lockdown is over and the borders are open and your country is not, you know, horribly taken over by COVID and all of these things. You know, I think for a long time, all of us in the world were so proud of like being in the technological age and being able to use the phone and and like access all these things online. And now we're kind of like, no. I mean, that's great, but it doesn't replace human connection. And I think, you know, one of the things that I really tried to bring in the film is the importance of human connection, because this is a family that's only been connected online for so long. And now they have the human connection, they're excited, but it does have it takes a toll, and it takes some getting used to, because you can't just switch it off. I feel like it just takes on a whole new meaning in this year, and with all the things that we've been through this year.
And so my last question is, what advice would you give to women who want to work in film?
Yeah. I mean, this is such a great time for women, I think. Women, and also women who want to work in film, because for the first time in a long time, or ever, certainly in my lifetime, people are actually more aware and willing to do something about the disparities, and willing to actually appreciate the voice that we have as women, the perspective that we have as women. You know, I mean, you think about how much of our stories that we've consumed forever, for our whole entire lives, have only been told from one group's perspective. One group of older white men have told the stories of everybody. For most of us, that's really weird, you know. And so you know, my advice is just like, just do it, like, you know, build your voice, build your courage, because you're going to need all of that. It's certainly not a cakewalk. People aren't just like, come on in, here's all the money and the resources. It's better, but it's not, you know, it's not free. And there are things that we have to say. And I think our perspective is very valuable, especially for a world that is healing, because that is the stage that we're going to be going into now, is where we all need to heal from all of the wounds, not just COVID wounds, but racism and injustices and environment and like all of these different things. And women, you know, those are things that we're very close to because of our relationship with the earth, our relationship to children and humanity and all of those kinds of things. So the world actually does need us, and they need our voices, and they need our perspective and our leadership, not only as women, but as artists. We really do have an opportunity right now to heal. You know, like people, we all need therapy, for one. The entire world needs many hundreds of hours of therapy after what we've been through this year, and we can't afford it. And, you know, the therapy that we can afford and we do have access to is art, is music, is painting, is beauty, is like the things that we create. And so I think it's really a very opportune and important time for artists everywhere, not just filmmakers, but all kinds of artists, to really sort of like dig into our feelings so that we can share those and help other people to heal their stuff. But in order to do that, you know, counseling kind of work, we have to also be ready for that. So it's really just encouraging us all as artists, as an artist community, to get ready, to prepare ourselves, whatever it is that we need to work on, so that we can offer our services and our gifts to our society and our communities, because we need it. We clearly and desperately need the work of artists, and people of color, and the people who've been marginalized for far too long. Now is the time. So, a luta continua.